everyone, and welcome to day 6 of the Happy Poly Day series. Today, I'm joined by Roy from Open Relating, who is a personal coach who assists people with developing healthy, conscious, autonomous relationships. Today, we'll be talking about Roy's polyamory origin story and how that has shaped his view of how relationships intersect with societal beliefs on masculinity, politics, and capitalism. So there's quite a lot to cover today in an hour, and I'm very, very excited to get into it. So, Roy, to begin, could you tell people a little bit more about yourself and your origin story, how you got into polyamory? Like, how did you get to where you are today?
Hey, Leanne. Yes. So I am 51 years old. So that means I already lived quite a life. And by the time I discovered polyamory, I already um, lived in 3 different continents, traveled around the world, had a long career, was in a marriage and long-term relationship, had a child. Did a lot of the things that you're kind of supposed to do on the relationship escalator.
Hmm.
And it was really the fact that I felt like I was failing at it because my marriage ended, my relationship after that ended. I I felt like I just couldn't hack monogamy,
Hmm.
and I didn't know the reason why. So I began dating again in my early 40s, and just didn't know what to expect and basically what else I could do.
Hmm.
I didn't even know what polyamory is. I never heard that word. Never heard about ethical non-monogamy. I had in the past tried to have a don't ask, don't tell type situation with my ex-wife when our own sex life was basically floundering.
Hmm.
And, but it wasn't really helpful in any way. It was basically this old diatribe that you try to fix your marriage by going to have sex with other people. That doesn't really work if you have, core issues.
Hmm.
So what happened was that I went on a date with somebody from OkCupid, and we had a really high match score, like 99%, and I was very excited about meeting her. And when we met, we had really instant chemistry, and I didn't expect it, but she told me at the date that she was non-monogamous and explained what that means for her. And she said that she was already married before, she had an adult child, she just didn't want to be exclusive with anybody. She wanted like her freedom, wanted to live alone, etc. And I just really connected to it mentally. I just thought, yeah, that kind of makes total sense. And I really like this person. And to date her, that's basically the price of admission, right? Because that's
Hmm.
how, she kind of set her boundaries very clearly. And I just took it on board and said, yeah, let's try this. And I haven't really looked back since. I never really wanted to go back to monogamy at all.
Hmm.
The evolution of that was that in the beginning it was an open relationship where we had casual sex with other people. Then she found another boyfriend, and I met him, and I really got on well with him. And even though neither of us are with her, we are still good friends
Oh,
till
okay.
today. Yeah,
Yeah,
like
that's
10 plus
lovely.
years later. Yeah. So the so that was basically the beginning. She told me about some books to read, like The Ethical Slut and Sex at Dawn, and I started doing some more research because I like to read and understand more about a topic that I find interesting. And around about 2014, I met someone on speed dating that
Hmm.
was kind of for people who are kind of kinky and poly and non-monogamous, etc. And we hit it off. We started seeing each other. We were both seeing other people at the time, and very quickly realized there's a lot of compatibility in our kind of kinks and in the things that we like to do together, etc., and activities. So we ended up moving in together within like 6 months of meeting. And that was the first time I was in a nesting polyamorous relationship.
Mm, okay.
Initially, it felt like a great opportunity to really go deep with somebody, to still, be able to make plans for the future and to think about life together while also having that freedom of building other relationships and having other encounters and being more fluid. However, in that relationship that lasted about 3.5 years, over time, a lot of, I think, their insecurities and fears came to the fore and created a situation where uh, she needed to control my actions and control who I was seeing and what I was doing with them.
Right.
And while we never outright like sat down and talked about that as clear boundaries or her needs, that's what happened in reality. And I think that I didn't know what my needs were. I didn't know that I had this real need to be free and autonomous and not be bound by somebody else's insecurities.
Mm.
And so there was a lot of this kind of pushback, and both of us being very stubborn and agreeing to rules to try and work on our relationships. And then those rules wouldn't really work because I wasn't very happy with them. We'd often just agree to avoid her um, getting too angry, and kind of basically escalating into a big kind of fight.
Mm.
So over time, as I was pushing against those rules and constantly trying to we were like renegotiating and not finding a way that it would actually work long term. Also, trust deteriorated in both directions,
Mm.
and eventually the conflicts became most initially verbally abusive and then physically abusive.
Right.
For the last 6 months or so, really like seriously physically abusive.
Mm-hmm.
So at that time, again, I didn't know who to talk to. I didn't know where I can actually find help. There was a lot of gaslighting involved, where I actually basically was made to believe that everything that happens to me is like my fault.
Mm-hmm.
And the real difficulty in that environment is, even though we had quite a few mutual friends that were also polyamorous and open, etc., but they were mutual friends, and I didn't feel I could go to them with my problems because
Mm.
they were friends with both of us. So I
Yeah.
felt quite isolated, and my own friends, long-term friends, didn't really understand polyamory. They didn't
Mm.
have a reference point to actually help me,
Mm.
or at least that's what it felt like to me. And their advice would have been was to either stay monogamous or leave her.
Mm.
And I kind of felt that they just don't understand enough about the situation to give me that advice, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, eventually it came to a head, and we broke up. And only then I started speaking to friends around me and reaching out and realizing that there were people that noticed what was happening, that felt bad about it, but just didn't want to get involved. And it's really out of that experience that I realized eventually that I want to be able to work with people who might not know where to turn to. That basically feel like people around them, family or friends, don't understand their situation, maybe
Mm-hmm.
because the relationship is not very traditional and not kind of normal, quote unquote,
Mm-hmm.
and they may not actually realize if they are in a abusive or toxic situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
I think I always believed that because it's polyamory and because it's so unusual, we have to really work so hard and struggle to
Mm.
make it work,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it never occurred to me that there can be an easy way of doing it. And so,
Yeah.
well, it's so rare and difficult, then we have to struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's a big reason of why I stayed for as long as I did,
Mm-hmm.
right? And both of us did mean things to each other, and we're both basically quite also both stubborn and not aware enough of how to communicate in a non-violent way.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, um, what I've learned from that experience is that it's so important to know what your needs are going into a relationship and to be very clear about your boundaries as soon as you can going into a committed relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And following that, I took some time off. I was quite wounded, both emotionally and physically,
Mm-hmm.
and went to therapy.
Mm-hmm.
I initially had a therapist that didn't really understand anything about polyamory or kink, and I ended up like basically just spending half the time just explaining concepts to him and
Oh
and
God.
terminologies.
Yeah, that's super
So
common. Yeah.
yeah, and eventually I found somebody who had their own experience in that and basically could relate, and that was really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And then within about 4 or 5 months of the breakup, I found myself feeling much better about myself. And then at a party that I organized, which was a leaving party for the place I had originally shared with my ex, I invited a few friends and then some people who were kind of new friends that I met recently, including two women who didn't know each other, but basically who came there. And um, in that party, we had really nice connections. I had connections with both of them, and in that weekend, basically started dating them both, and they
In the
became
same
my
weekend.
two long term partners. The same weekend, same party, yeah.
Wow.
And
Wow. I think
Yeah,
it's so rare that like two relationships basically start like at the same time. And so like, you know, you've told me this before, Roy, and every time it's just like that is just, you know, like such a unique story. And so how long have you been together with both of these women?
3 years.
3 years.
Well, 3 years at the beginning of this month. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And okay. I think like you know, your story is so important, Roy, like, you know, for a couple of reasons. You know, obviously like um you know, I think people often forget that polyamory can also be abusive. And I think a lot of people kind of fall into the one true Scotsman fallacy thing. Like, and I talked about this with Ro as well, where, you know, just because like someone did something unethically, then some people will write it off and go like, well, you didn't apply it correctly and therefore it is not polyamory. And then you end up dismissing and invalidating quite a lot of individuals' experiences where, you know, they were definitely in a non-monogamous relationship and it was definitely also toxic. I think particularly as like like as a man as well, like, you know, I think it's very important for uh you know, for you to be to share the story and to kind of talk about it, because people often forget that it's not just women who are victims. um and you know, for just like hearing all of this, like I imagine it must have been so difficult, you know, after kind of that experience, which, you know, was, you know, basically your kind of early experience with polyamory, right? And you didn't know anything better. um how was, you know, transit the process kind of transitioning from that to, you know, embracing like two I presume much healthier relationships at the same time? You know, what was that like?
Hmm. Well, first off, it's the people that I was involved with, became involved with, are much healthier and are much better at talking about issues, and I think also share values with me much more closely.
Hmm.
And
hmm
that's another important message, is that just because you meet somebody who's polyamorous and you have attraction to them doesn't mean you share the same values. There's so many
mm,
different ways to practice polyamory. And say if I want solo polyamory and I don't want a hierarchy, and the other person wants polyamory but wants to be hierarchical,
hmm
then we're going to be struggling about agreeing how to actually manage our relationship.
yeah.
And I think at the heart of it, that's what basically what was going on before. So with my partners, the fact that those relationships developed in parallel meant that there was no hierarchy,
mm,
and each relationship developed on its own, and they knew it, they know about each other obviously. Then they met sometimes, but they're not friends. Their only connection is me.
hmm
So it's it. I think that that really helped with issues around maybe jealousy or feeling somehow like one person needs to be more priority because of time or
hmm
whatever. That didn't occur, right?
hmm
And so that I think that definitely helped. And ultimately, yeah, we share values around valuing independence and freedom.
hmm
So I identify as solo polyamorous, and I essentially, while I have these partners, we're all also dating other people,
hmm
and you know, and there are no strict rules around that. We just take care to be open with each other and update each other on what's going on in our lives.
hmm
And that would include also going on dates and who we might go on a date with, or whether we have it on a date. And obviously, we share an information that is required to keep everybody safe in
hmm
terms of
hmm
health, you know, and stuff like that. So it's just been such a fresh experience for me to be able to speak about everything without any fear of being attacked or being judged, right?
yeah, for sure.
And knowing that I can, even with the really difficult things, just come and sit down and talk about them,
Hmm
because we have this just established a trust that nothing that we're saying is about criticizing or attacking, you know, or wanting to take away anything from the other person. We're just talking
mm
about our feelings and whatever is alive for us. And sometimes that might not be very comfortable to hear, but if I have this absolute trust, my partner isn't trying to harm me in any way,
mm
which I
mm
didn't before, then I will take what they're telling me and I will process it without feeling like without needing to defend myself, you know,
hmm
to be defensive, which makes such a big difference when it comes to resolving any issue. You know,
hmm
when you're not starting from this place of being defensive.
yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, and along the way in the last 3 years, you know, it's just been beautiful to allow these relationships to blossom, and also have additional comet relationships with people that don't live in the country. And sadly, some of them I haven't been able to see for a couple of years because of COVID. So some of them didn't sustain themselves
Yeah.
as current romantic relationships, although in most cases we're still friends. And one of the things
Absolutely.
I really appreciate about polyamory is that there isn't this dichotomy or this binary decision of you're either together or you're not. You can transition into friendships, and friendships can transition into something else, and it's quite fluid. Because
Mhm.
for me, it's all about the connection with the individual, and if I care enough about them to, have them in my bed, in my house, and be sexual with them, I also care enough about them to maintain friendship.
Yeah.
If sexual romantic connection is no longer possible for whatever reason. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like, a lot of people see like a breakup as like immediate kind of downgrading like of the relationship, right? Or of the connection. But that isn't necessarily the case, right? Like you can like sometimes like the dynamic that does work best for you both is platonic. And I would much rather kind of transition into something that works better for us than like stay in a romantic relationship for the sake of being in a romantic relationship. And another thing that I wanted to touch on regarding what you said, Roy, was that like, you talked about how you didn't have community, like, when you were in that toxic relationship. And I think this is like a very common struggle that polyamorous people have, like, everyone immediately assumes that if you're in a non-monogamous dynamic, that it must be unhealthy and toxic in some way. So then, I feel like there is this pressure to prove them wrong, right? Yeah, and in a way, you kind of try to pretend that everything's fine because you want to make a point that like non-monogamous relationships can work. So then when you land yourself in a situation where like, it's very much not, then I think some people might feel isolated in that way because like they don't want to prove other people right. And I think an extra thing as well, regarding kind of, oh, well, it's polyamory. So therefore, I have to unlearn so much stuff. I have to struggle through so much stuff. Like, obviously, it's going to be difficult. That adds another layer to it because, I think that, in kind of the early days of kind of opening up or kind of just practicing polyamory, even if you didn't open up from a monogamous relationship, there's this sense that people may not be able to tell the difference between like what is just kind of regular growing pains in polyamory and what is like genuinely kind of toxic behavior from their partner. And I think like through that, like a lot of people can kind of just go like, oh, you're feeling jealous or you're feeling insecure, oh, just read a book and like do work on yourself, and the things will go away eventually, ignoring the fact that maybe the issue is not so much internal but external, something that like their partner is doing. This is something that I say a lot, when in terms of kind of dealing with jealousy. I think there's this idea in the polyamorous community that if you're feeling jealous, then it must be an internal issue. It must be something wrong with you. And that isn't always the case. Sometimes it's something that your partner is doing. Sometimes it's a need that isn't being met. And we shouldn't be trying to kind of eliminate jealousy or try to kind of like eradicate it completely, but listen to it and learn from it. Anyway, I just felt like those were important points to make because like I think that like people don't talk about like the dark side of polyamory and non-monogamy enough, and they don't talk about like potential red flags like in the early stages that people could easily pass off as like, oh, I just need to work on myself. So yeah.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, and I mean I missed a lot of red flags in the previous relationship, for those reasons. I think because I was rationalizing a lot of things. I was like, well, it's I'm still unlearning a lot of things. I have all this like monogamous mindsets that I kind of lived with for so long, and it's going to take me time to unlearn all of that. And also, I think that I was thinking of myself as having capacity to accept that things are going to go wrong, to deal with hardships, and to kind of push through it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Not necessarily realizing that self care is so important. I just did
mm-hmm,
not care for myself enough at all.
mm-hmm,
So that's something that now when I work with clients, I make sure that that's the priority.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And I think that it's also really important to really drill down to where does that jealousy come from, if that's the feeling that's emerging.
mm-hmm,
Is it external or internal? And is there something in the relationship that you might have a valid reason for why you're insecure about what's going on,
mm-hmm.
rather
Yeah,
than an externality of how you grew up or your attachment styles, etc. Yeah,
yeah,
and sometimes it's
absolutely.
a combination as well.
Yeah, yeah, of
It
course.
might be that you have insecure attachment, but you're also in a codependent relationship that's not that's harmful for you,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and it takes time to heal from things, and it needs to be done in order. You can't just like think you can fix all of your issues at the same time.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
sometimes, yeah, sometimes being in a polyamorous relationship isn't the healthiest thing if you're not ready for it,
Mm-hmm,
and sometimes and sometimes it might be. It kind of depends, I think, also on what's happening with your partner at the same time. I
Yeah,
think
absolutely.
in my case, we were both not really didn't know what we were doing, so that didn't help.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. It's kind of the
yeah.
blind leading the blind, right? Like, so I know that obviously, like in that relationship that you had, your first kind of experience with non-monogamy, you had like a lot of you struggled a lot with it, and kind of a lot with it was due to kind of the fact that like your partner, was being abusive. But I'm also wondering, if there were kind of issues that you struggled with, apart from that, issues with jealousy, or like kind of perhaps a kind of competitiveness, or with other partners, or that kind of thing. Was there anything in particular that you struggled with early in your polyamory journey that didn't necessarily have anything to do with kind of your partner being toxic?
Um, yes and no. So I think that even when I was monogamous, I never felt jealousy. It's just
Mm-hmm.
not something that I feel I have a strong kind of link with.
Mm-hmm.
And I often, in monogamy, just got quite an enjoyment from seeing people, say men, flirt with my partner
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and kind of chat them up. And it just felt, I mean, to me, it felt good. It felt like, oh yeah, it kind of means I have good taste if there other men want her as well.
Yeah.
And I liked kind of hearing about stories that they may have had when they were traveling, etc. So I don't think that was really ever an issue for me. Sometimes, especially if I'm feeling especially vulnerable or tired or stressed and not fully comfortable with myself, it's going to be harder to hear about my partner having an amazing time and meeting somebody great, and
Mm-hmm.
and tell me that stories.
Mm-hmm.
And on occasion that's happened. Sometimes if I see my partner maybe having intimacy with another person, I might feel some kind of a tinge of jealousy, like a pain in my chest, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But it's always been for me a great kind of spotlight on what is my insecurity there,
Mm-hmm.
and also on the fact that it just means that I care a lot about my partner.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's the FOMO thing where I just would rather that she did that with me, and because I care about her and I love
Mm-hmm.
her. So it's not a bad thing. I mean, I think that I've come to realize, and that took me time and therapy, and also all of the therapy training that I've been doing in the last couple of years,
Mm-hmm.
to accept that negative emotions and painful feelings aren't all bad.
Yeah.
Like it's okay to
Yeah.
feel those feelings
Mm-hmm.
and just allow them, just sit with them and feel them, and learn what I need to do, learn what I need from them,
Mm-hmm.
and they
Mm-hmm.
go away, and they don't stick to you.
Yeah.
If you allow yourself to feel them, they don't stick. It's when you fight them that they stick more.
Yeah,
You know.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And how, so, like, so Chad and I kind of talked about this, in our conversation, kind of about how, like, him growing up as a man and kind of being indoctrinated with kind of, the heteropatriarchy and all the societal beliefs that come along with that. And since you are one of like the few men that I'm interviewing like for this series, I'd very much like to hear your perspective as well, like as a polyamorous man. Like, what, were there any struggles that you had that are unique to kind of your lived experience as a man, or any particular beliefs about what it meant to be a man and kind of masculinity and that kind of thing that you grappled with
Hmm.
in the early parts of your polyamory journey?
Yeah, I think it's an important question, and I think that it's a really important topic to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
The For me, toxic masculinity is just another name for the you know the air that I was breathing growing up in a country that was very militaristic and kind of basically led by toxic masculinity, and
Which country was that?
Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So in Israel, the military, the army is this big thing, and everybody has to go to the army, and everybody talks about heroics, so people who have been in battles and stuff like that. So the idea of what is a man is wrapped up in this very, I guess, in a way, violent and
Mm.
and it's all about this kind of heroics, so fighting
Yeah,
and
yeah.
winning
Mm-hmm.
and conquering.
Mm.
And then the language of dating, of relationships, also becomes that
Right. Okay.
hunting, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think you hear that also in Europe and America, but I think in Israel maybe it's a little bit stronger because of that culture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So in America, for example, dating terminology tends to revolve around sport, like hitting, getting
Yeah.
to second base, getting to third base.
Yeah,
In Israel, a
baseball,
lot of it,
yeah.
it's a lot, yeah, it's a lot. In Israel, it's a lot about military terms and stuff like that. So,
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah, in that sense, I think it was just in the water. Now, I grew up with a mother and two sisters.
Hmm.
So I think that I grew up seeing a very strong, capable mother that could basically do everything. And as such, I grew up with a lot of respect for women and very much feeling like I'm a feminist or at least an ally in that respect. So it wasn't necessarily something in my own behavior, but I definitely feel like I learned to just accept it around me when I
Mm.
heard stuff like that and not necessarily speak up, speak
Hmm.
out,
Hmm.
which is something I try to do a lot more now.
Hmm.
And and still there was, the whole concept of ownership in relationships
Yes.
uh, is also something that's tied for me to language and to culture. In Israel, when in Jewish custom, when people get married, the husband literally buys his wife from her parents.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a
Yeah.
formalized kind of document where you buy her for some camels or something. It's
Mm.
part of the traditional ceremony, right?
Right. Okay.
And
Wow.
yeah, and the name for husband in Hebrew is owner.
Mm.
Literally translated as owner.
Okay, yeah. There are some kind of parallels with that from in China as well, because like the word you know in the Chinese language, if you're talking about a man marrying a woman, the term for that is different from like a woman marrying a man. Like basically like
Hmm.
yeah, a man marries a woman and a woman is, I suppose the translation is like is taken by the man. There's like different
Hmm.
verbs that we use depending on like who we're referring to and who is marrying whom.
Yeah,
Even though obviously it's the same act on both sides, right? But like
yeah,
there's a specific kind of ownership element when kind of talking about like the kind of the man like kind of taking the woman like from her family and being married like into his family. So like
yeah.
there are definitely like I think this is kind of cross culture. And yeah, I completely see what you mean.
Hmm. So it always bugged me, and I think it just started bugging me a lot more when I started going into kind of polyamorous relationships because of the inherent equality and freedom that everybody gets to have.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I talk to friends in Israel, earlier on in my journey, oftentimes I would have guy friends saying, "Oh, I can definitely see how I can fall in love with more than one woman, but I can never tolerate that my wife will see other men."
Yeah, super common. Yeah.
Yeah, super common. So that for me is very much all about toxic masculinity. It's somehow this entitlement that
Mm.
men seem to have.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Or that she
And
can
yeah,
see other women but not other men because women don't count, right? Like
well, yeah, yeah, it's all part of the same thing. So,
yeah.
yeah, and somehow a relationship between two women is somehow less than a relationship between a man and a woman. I mean, what's that about?
Yeah, also it's
So,
like, oh, but
yeah,
it's for me, like it's like hot and I get to see it. So it's still kind of still again entitlement to women's bodies because it's like, well, I get to enjoy it. It's for my consumption. And
hmm,
so it's fine. Whereas like I'm not gonna be turned on by like my wife like having sex with another man. I think there's
yeah,
that element of it as well.
yeah. And you can see very clearly how in our culture, we both men and women learned that behavior and learned to expect that.
Mm-hmm.
I've spoken to women in countries like, especially in Eastern Europe, Russia, Israel, Southern Europe, that also expect the man's behavior to be very chauvinistic, and
Mm-hmm.
that equates for them with like a real man, like
Mm-hmm.
a real man takes, doesn't ask,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And out of that, there's this whole. I think that in those cultures, it's kind of perceived that if you say like a woman and you ask her if you can kiss her, she thinks of you as like a sissy, as somehow like soft,
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
you don't like take what you want.
Yeah.
And the expectation is that you just grab her and kiss her to
Yeah.
prove your manhood.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah. So that's I guess that's how I grew up. Luckily, it didn't stick to me, and I also left Israel when I was 21,
Mm-hmm.
um, and yeah, and was able to I guess absorb different cultures and different experiences and form my own opinion about it. The So it was relatively easy for me to just accept that fundamental equality for men, women, and everybody else.
Hmm.
But I do still find a lot of the resistance to that, to accepting that masculinity, the way we are taught it, can be toxic in clients that are struggling with things around jealousy when they're men, you know.
Yes.
Uh, and sometimes also women who don't believe they deserve the same, who somehow accept that as just a way of the world,
Hmm. Hmm.
that that they shouldn't have the same desires and needs and wants as men.
Yeah.
I often tell clients, I often think about how men complain that it's so hard to find a date, it's so hard to find a girlfriend, etc., because men are uh, instinctively wary of talking to somebody on the street or of meeting somebody unless it's like in a safe place, you know. And clearly, most of the men that complain about it, they're not abusers or people who cause harm,
Hmm.
but I think it's really important to be aware of why women are reluctant, why women are hesitant,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely.
It
There are
is
so
it
many
is
societal
so
factors that play into it, and
yeah,
Chad and I talked about this as well. And it's not just, it's just not just on the men's side. I think there is, there are certain things that like certain beliefs that women perpetuate, certain societal norms that are, not great. Right? Like, I think the heteropatriarchy is maintained by both men and women, and well, everyone really, like in various tiny ways that all contribute to like a very messed up culture.
yeah.
Yeah.
And in a way, I do believe, and maybe I'm idealistic and maybe too naive, but I do believe that polyamory and just opening up the whole spectrum of gender orientations and relationship dynamics does serve an opportunity to challenge the heterodoxy, to challenge the kind of patriarchal view of the world, and also challenge capitalism
Hmm.
potentially.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because of this idea that there isn't a set way to do things, you have to basically figure out for yourself what's right for you. You can't
Hmm.
just follow a paved path that somebody else told you this is the way,
Hmm.
And that just so when people start questioning assumptions and questioning core beliefs, they start actually thinking about, okay, so what do I want? What
Hmm.
and who is the person that wants it? Like, do I know myself enough?
Hmm.
And that can open up. So for me, like the polyamory is open this whole other area of questioning beliefs, like around heterosexuality, around sexuality and kink and stuff like that. You know,
Hmm.
all of a sudden you see that there's no real reason to say no to something that you haven't actually considered,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Just
Yeah.
because you hear other people saying no.
Yeah.
And so first you realize the world is so amazingly complex and beautiful and varied, which is great.
Yes.
And you also realize that it's okay to be an individual with your differences and your specific needs that might be different from others.
Hmm.
So one thing that I think you've mentioned and you polled about it as well, that the high correlation there is between people who identify as polyamorous or non-monogamous and people who are neurodivergent
Yes.
or on
Yes.
the autistic spectrum or have ADHD or other divergencies,
Hmm.
right? And I see that in my real life all the time. I date people who are largely neurodivergent in some way,
Hmm.
and yeah, so but it makes total sense to me in that sense of once you accept that people can be individuals with their own specific um, uh, characteristics, and they don't have to apologize for it,
Hmm.
right? Then the level of acceptance of the differences becomes much greater, and people who are neurodivergent feel accepted, feel that they can be comfortable, that they can be themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's
Yeah.
super important. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think there's something to be said about like, I think as a neurodivergent person myself, right? Like, I've frequently spoken about how I feel that like my polyamory and my autism do kind of complement and benefit each other in various ways. And like being autistic, like there are so many societal scripts and norms that just never made sense to me, and so I just kind of did away with them. And once you do away with one thing, it's much easier to question the other stuff.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, being able to kind of tailor my relationships to like what I really want, and to kind of question how, this question status quo, question how things are done, and be able to kind of customize my relationships to like what I and my partners want them to be, and not kind of what society expects of me, is so freeing. Because I struggle so much to kind of like follow like what society does anyway, that I would much rather just kind of do my own thing. And um, Yeah, and I think that that's why there is such a high correlation between neurodivergence and
Mm.
polyamory, because it's all about, tailoring and customizing things to yourself, like in a world that already doesn't accommodate you in many ways.
Yeah.
And so yeah, and like we've spoken about this before, like when I presented at polyamory day, and I remember like we were talking about in our own kind of chats about like being neurodivergent or dating people who are neurodivergent, and how kind of that influences polyamory. um
Yeah, that's right.
mhm,
Now, by the way, we will have Polyamory Day 2022 on the 2nd of April, and I would
mhm,
love to kind of go deeper into a lot of these topics and try and expand on that.
mhm,
And we have an opportunity to do like a bigger event, but that's coming up. One, I can't speak to the experience of being neurodivergent because I don't think I am. I don't know. I mean, maybe, but I don't. At least I haven't experienced any difficulties or any challenges
mhm,
for society for who I am.
mhm,
I am speaking to the to how this can help neurotypical people
mhm,
come to a greater degree of acceptance of people who are different from them. And I
mhm,
think that
mhm.
that's what kind of polyamory and kind of challenging relationship norms can actually help with.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, but yeah, so what I would love to hear about, what you said earlier about how kind of polyamory, challenges like mainstream norms, right? So, challenges uh, like the heteropatriarchy, and capitalism. And I would love to kind of hear you elaborate a little bit more on that, how specifically, kind of polyamory can be used as, like a
Mhm.
tool for
For
revolution.
revolution. Yeah. um, well, so one thing that I've noticed is that when I have multiple relationships and my partners also have relationships, I learn so much more about the different interactions that people have
Mhm,
since I'm intimately involved with them and I can see, I can observe the relationships with other people. So I learned, for example, about relationships that women have with women because that's not something I was very close up looking at before,
mhm,
right? And I learned about, again, different ways of relating to each other. Like some of them are, some relationships are more casual or play based or platonic. And um, so it just totally expanded my understanding of what is an intimate relationship,
mhm,
which in the past was like most people, is supposed to be kind of monogamous and sexual and romantic
mhm.
and friendship based, like everything in one.
Yes.
So once you accept that, you also can basically see that there are so many new connections and relationships you can have. You don't have to limit yourself. You don't have to stop in making them and deepening them. Like
Mhm.
intimacy becomes something that you can share with a lot more people, not just like with your one true partner.
Yes.
Yeah. And that makes me closer to more people, makes me care about more people. It just creates it kind of helps to create this interlocking community, interdependent community
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
in a way that dyad based, kind of nucleus family type situation doesn't do.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like a return to the village where
Mhm.
people looked out for each other and cared about each other, and it was all like essentially an extended big family. And I
Yeah.
think we can kind of get back to it with the help of this expanded vision of relationships.
Yeah,
So that's
absolutely. Like what you mentioned about kind of the nuclear family, and how like we moved from kind of larger kind of co-regulating kind of communities to kind of little units of mother and father and two and a half kids, and kind of where we're very isolated, in little pods, and that's kind of like there's I don't have like the language for this, but then like how that kind of furthers like a kind of capitalist agenda to motivate us to work, and to like to stress ourselves out, or like being like not paid enough to like barely afford rent and all that kind of stuff, when you know we could be all like collaborating in a
mhm.
commune, and living that cottagecore life, right? Like as kind of the memes go. um,
Yeah, exactly.
and yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
and then
Mhm,
so to build up on that,
mhm,
where capitalism comes in is that capitalism and I think feudalism beforehand always needed to have an elite that's controlling the proletariat,
mhm.
right, or
Right.
the farming community, whatever it is. There needs to so for that element of control, it's really important to convince the masses of people that what they're getting is enough, and also that
Mm,
they have to fight with each other for a seat at the table, to kind of to be able to kind of get ahead, right? It comes
Yes.
at the expense of somebody else. So
Yes.
capitalism teaching us about the kind of win-lose rather than win-win. It teaches about scarcity and having to compete with other
Mm.
people in your kind of strata to be able to basically level up.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And and it really contrasts with this idea of abundance when it comes to, as I mentioned, this just like open vision of relationships, of just because you have doesn't mean another person can also can't have, kind
Hmm.
of looking at a win-win situation there.
Hmm.
And so just because I have a romantic partner and we are very intimate and together doesn't exclude her having another partner
Hmm.
who also has a very high degree of intimacy. I don't have
Hmm.
to feel threatened by that because what I'm getting from her is what I need,
Yeah.
and that it doesn't take it away from me that she also has a connection with somebody else. So once you kind of broaden that out, um, this idea that I have to compete and take from someone else no longer holds water.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's a
Absolutely.
challenge to capitalism in many ways.
Hmm.
In terms of like, when I care about more people, money and profit isn't the primary motive that drives me,
Hmm.
right? And if I don't have to think like somehow I have to prove myself as more worthy than other competitors and other suitors to find that one true love, then I'm not spending my life just obsessing about making lots of money and building, getting a big house to impress a potential spouse and things like that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So yeah, right now romance is tied into capitalism.
Mm.
Yeah, love is co-opted by capitalism, and
Hmm.
I really think we can challenge that and maybe use polyamory as a way of doing that. Not just, but it's like one of the tools
Hmm.
to change the system.
Yes. Yeah.
And yeah, one thing I noticed that you brought this article that was written by a conservative non-monogamous person,
Yes,
and
yes. Oh my God, I've been
yeah.
waiting to bring this up. Yeah. So a bit of context for obviously because the people watching this are not in the chat. So like in the kind of polyamory Instagram creators chat, I found this article from 2019 that was written by a conservative right-wing person on the benefits of polyamory. But he was writing about polyamory from a very right-wing perspective. And he made a lot of really good points. He definitely like made his case like to like what would be like a very right-wing audience, but we were all just collectively losing our minds over this article. It was amazing. um
Mm.
and I will definitely have to kind of link the article like in the caption, or maybe should I, or would I, do I want that site to get more clicks? But
Yeah, it's a good question, right? Because like I said, some of it is palatable, and you can like it's hard to disagree with all things he's saying there about freedom and respect for people who are different from you, etc.
yeah,
What I
definitely.
did find really objectionable and kind of a warning sign is trying to co-opt it into the hierarchical nuclear family, into Christianity, like basically seeing how it can sit with religion.
Yes,
And
yes, and a
yeah,
pro-natalist society. I remember now. There was a particular focus on
yeah.
like, there was still like ultimately like the focus on like a hierarchical like dyad and then kind of other relationships supporting that. And so,
Hmm.
instead of kind of going like, deconstruct it all and fuck everything, like it was very much like, here is how you can still kind of maintain your like nuclear family type situation, but you have other things kind of supporting that and stuff. And I thought that was so bizarre. Like I genuinely, like we, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. We were all like, oh
Yeah.
my God, what is, because polyamory ultimately, it's so funny to me that like I see it as like such like kind of freeing, like almost like anarchist, right, kind of relationship style, where that you are free to kind of customize it to whatever you want. You question one thing, you question all of it, right? Whereas these people are like, we're still kind of going to maintain these things and stay faithful to God and maintain heterosexuality and do all these things, but like we're also going to like have a little fun here on the side, and that kind of ultimately all supports like all these things that are very very rigid. And so yeah, it's so bizarre that like they don't kind of see it as a uh as a means to like deconstruct and question everything, but like as like a just like a relationship style, something like a fun, something different that you can do, but not kind of questioning these kind of like core beliefs that they have. And so yeah, anyway, like
Yeah, and while yeah, while I while I do want to like also argue for their right to live like that, like if you want to be a Christian and go to church, or like, and believe in marriage and also have a boyfriend or a play partner, etc., and for that to be openly accepted, that's great. I mean, I want to also fight for the people's right to do that. I guess the concern that was raised for me is that it becomes co-opted and institutionalized as like now it's okay to have a a marriage of three people, or now it's okay to have I don't know, to have other structures that basically support that main idea um, of just marriage as an institution. Because I mean, for me,
Yes.
it doesn't make even sense that we're still keeping that alive as an
Mm-hmm.
institution,
Mm-hmm.
rather than having it something that people who within the religion want to get married, they can do that, but it doesn't necessarily have to have a legal status, because that keeps outside of the tent everybody who doesn't want to get married, who doesn't want to live with a partner, maybe who wants to live alone, right? Because it has real
Mm-hmm.
implications in tax credits and other benefits,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
which prioritize people who want to have children or who want to get married, who want to live together,
Yeah,
and that's not
absolutely.
okay either.
Yeah, you make such a good point about marriage, Roy, actually. And like I used to be like I think like in my very early days of practicing polyamory, I was like, why can't people kind of marry like more than one person at the same time? And now I'm like, why is the state involved in my romantic life? Like, abolish it all. I mean, obviously, while I know that marriage abolition is probably never going to happen, on realistically speaking, I at least it's probably not going to happen for my lifetime, I think. But like like this is kind of you touched on it kind of exactly what I mean. Like why are people kind of advocating for like plural marriage or group marriage or like whatever when you know we should not be kind of offering a kind of financial incentive for something like romance and love and kind of emotions and that kind of thing. And this can get very toxic very quickly. There are so many people who stay in legal marriages, like even though they're in like a potentially kind of unhappy or like toxic or even abusive situation, so, because like they need to like maintain it for like financial reasons or
Yeah,
legal reasons. And
that's right.
and there are kind of ways that and this traps people, like I think. And particularly if you're in like a place where like it's not very easy to get divorced. And and this is kind of one of the major reasons why like me and my anchor partner, like we don't have a plan on getting married. And I had a conversation with my mom about this the other day, where like because she was like, you love each other so much, why don't you get married? And I was like, well, because I don't want.
Because we love each other so much.
Exactly. And
Yeah,
that is that. You took the words out of my mouth, Roy. I
amazing,
was like, because we love each other so
amazing.
much, and we don't.
Yeah,
What I said to her specifically was that I don't want our marriage to be. I don't want to. I don't want our marriage to be weaponized.
mm,
10 and 20 years down the line, because
yeah,
we may love each other now, or we may be extremely committed to each other now, but I can't guarantee. I am not the same person I was 5 years ago, and I cannot guarantee that I will be the same person in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years.
yeah,
And as a kindness to our future selves, me and my partner are not getting married because like we don't want that kind of like legal or financial fodder to be kind of to sour our relationship, right? I was
yeah.
like, I actually want to make it easy for my partner to leave me if the relationship should turn sour. Like the last thing I want is for extra things like money and finances
Yeah.
to complicate the situation. Like
And
it's like I think where basically the crux of my argument, as I explained to my mother, was that while of course I hope that like my happiness and like the maintenance of the relationship will always coincide, and will coincide for like the rest of my life. That is a hope that I have, right? um if one day like I should have to choose between maintaining the relationship or maintaining my happiness, or rather having my partner be happy as well, then I would choose like our mutual happiness like over maintaining the relationship. And so obviously I want that process to be as easy as possible. Whereas I feel like a lot of people would choose maintaining a relationship and sacrificing quite a lot for the relationship, rather than, thinking about like their happiness and kind of general fulfillment in life. And I do think that like while like monogamy is like a very valid relationship style and many people practice it and live very, very happy lives, I do think that in a long-term monogamous relationship, people do end up having to sacrifice quite a lot of things in order to maintain monogamy in a way that I personally don't feel you have to do to such an extent in a non-monogamous dynamic. That's my belief, though.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think largely agree with you. I don't care if people are choose to be monogamous or multigamous and have multiple partners. What I do know for myself and what I hope to also help clients with is that first of all, that they know that their partner is or partners are with them because of choice, because they want to
Yes.
be, not because of some
Yes.
kind of obligation or fear. That's
Yes.
really important, and that we constantly like check in with each other to know that we're still on the right track. We still are happy being with each other, and because as we change, my partner is going to change as well, and we may have evolving needs that are going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a monogamous exclusive relationship tends to limit what you could like do outside of your core relationship. And that can sometimes feel restrictive, but for some people it doesn't feel restrictive. It's fine, and that's okay. As
Mm.
long as they are always aware that it's not the structure that's keeping it together, but it's their connection.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, completely. And kind of touching on like what you said earlier, I think another point that I want to bring up regarding kind of what you said about how capitalism engenders kind of like competitiveness and scarcity in relationships. And I think it to an extent materialism. Um, a common thing that I get asked a lot is, kind of polyamorous dynamic, right? Like, is like, what if your partner leaves you for someone else? What if they find someone better than you? What if they find someone smarter than you, hotter than you, or whatever, just kind of better than you, in that way, and kind of ignoring the sense of kind of like what is better anyway. Um,
Mm.
like the response that I have is, you know, your partner doesn't love you because you are like the hottest, smartest, and kind of quote unquote best person in the entire world. Like if that were the case, if people only kind of stayed with their partners because like they were like the best option possible, people would be constantly trading up all the time. As soon as they saw a better option, then they would trade up. And of course, some people do that. Some people do, like, they stay in a relationship until like they see a better option and they leave their partner and they go, right. That does happen, and I'm not trying to deny that, but not everyone does that, right? Like, I don't love my partner because like I like, obviously I do think he is amazing, and I do think he is very attractive, but let's be real, he is not the hottest person in the universe, and I know this, he knows this, we both know this. But I don't love him because of that. Like I love him because of like the bond that we have created and like the compatibility that we share, and like the history that we built together, and what we will build together in future, our goals, our dreams, like whatever. And like this is why like I don't worry about him kind of like being with someone who like may be more conventionally attractive than me, or may have like a certain skill that I don't, or may have like a certain degree that I don't, or whatever. Because I think it's important to recognize that like as individuals, right, we bring different things to the table. And even if someone is quote unquote kind of like better in some respects, like that doesn't necessarily mean anything about like the compatibility of their connection or anything like that. And so um I think like once we are able to kind of let go of like that kind of sense of materialism in relationships, which I think is kind of a belief that is kind of that capitalism definitely contributes to, then we're able to kind of rest much more easy, and feel more secure in our connections and be recognized for our worth, like not by like what we, like what we like provide, like I guess, but like for who we are.
Yeah, yeah, that's a lot of it is tied into this kind of scarcity mindset. So working on that and challenging our views and our beliefs is an important part of that process, and then replacing it with new mindsets, like with an abundant mindset that allows for that expansion.
Mm-hmm.
And again, regardless of where you are on the kind of relationship spectrum, it's always helpful to have a more abundant mindset.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I do as a coach is I teach a course which is 4 weeks long with 4 sessions where we look at all these scarcity beliefs and mindsets, and we challenge them and we question them and we can unpack them, both kind of universally and also individually for the people in the course, and then we replace them with new beliefs that we can create for ourselves. And
Mm-hmm.
that requires us to know who we are, to know our needs, know our values, and then set up some boundaries around those. This is like, important for me to have these needs met, and then I can feel a lot more free to relax and not constantly fear that I'm missing out or that I need something more, And that's been a great experience for me to explore that several times this year with different groups of people in different classes. And I hope to do another one in February to start another class. So that will be, yeah, that's something that I'm really passionate about, just like helping more people just start to question these beliefs that they grew up with, and replace it with something that's really right for them. That's not just a general thing that all society is supposed to have, but what's individually right for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, just like one more thing before we wrap up, Roy. You used the word just now, multigamous. And I know what it means and you know what it means, but for the people who are watching, could you explain that term a little bit more? Because this is something that you coined.
Yeah, I will. And I know that, some people really hate it when somebody creates a new word because they
Mhm.
feel it's like pretentious or whatever. And I just want to preface it that polyamory was also a word that was invented by people
Yeah.
uh, in the last century, right? So
Yeah.
it didn't exist before. And
Hmm.
it actually shouldn't exist, which I think you pointed out as well, that it's basically a combination of Latin and Greek.
Well, a lot of words
So
are a combination of Latin and Greek, like television, but yes.
yeah, yeah. So I was actually feeling unhappy about non-monogamy as a blanket label for the relationship dynamic, and I do see a difference between what you do and what you are.
Mm,
So what you do is how you practice a relationship. So monogamy or swinging or solo polyamory as a practice, those are dynamics. And who you
yes.
are is like monoamorous or polyamorous.
Yes.
And that is basically the way you love, the way you kind of hold love for multiple people or one person. And that
Yes.
varies between people.
Hmm.
And for some, maybe they can do either, but it's convenient for them to choose a relationship dynamic of one sort.
Mm,
For others, it's really an orientation, and it's something that even if they didn't know they were like that from the beginning, they like when I realized that is something that that works for me. I also looked back at my life and everything, and basically everything made sense about why I was unhappy in monogamous relationships in the past.
mm,
There was
mm.
something missing there, which was the polyamory. I just didn't know it, so I blamed other things for it not
Yes.
working out.
Yes.
So that's basically the preface. The term non-monogamy as an umbrella term for me feels othering. It feels like it's basically saying there is monogamy, which is like the default, and then there's all these other things that are not monogamy.
Yeah. It's kind of like if
And
we said non-heterosexuality instead of homosexuality.
exactly. So if
Yeah.
people who are queer were just called like non-straight or non-hetero, that wouldn't sit well with anybody,
Hmm.
and it's not okay. So in that sense, I don't want to be othered that way or just kind of be defined by what I'm not.
Yes.
So I kind of found this word that made sense in that respect, like multiple relationships, multigamy,
Hmm.
and as far as I know, nobody else is using it in a different context.
Yeah.
So it was free, and I decided to start using it, and it
Hopefully it
helps
will
me.
catch
I
on.
don't I don't really care if it catches on or not. That doesn't really matter to me. It helps
Hmm.
to basically feel better about not always feeling like I am something that I'm not.
Hmm.
It's simple, but to me it's effective, and I like words that help me make sense of the world.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
everybody needs terminologies. Not everybody needs labels, and I think that for some it helps, for others they don't care, and that's fine too.
Yeah. No, I think,
Yeah.
labels and words and that kind of thing, always very, very, very useful. Some people feel boxed in by them, others kind of use them to find identity and community.
Yeah.
So Roy, I think you're doing fantastic work, in terms of like, the kind of deconstructing kind of like capitalism and patriarchy and all that kind of stuff, and helping people like of all kind of relationship orientations and desires kind of build kind of like the healthy and consciously chosen relationships that they want. So feel free to kind of check out Roy's website at I'm gonna do that again. So feel free to check out Roy's website at
Openrelating.love.
openrelating.love. And where else can
Yeah.
people find you, Roy? So on Instagram, you're open
On
relating. Are you on any other
Instagram,
platforms?
Twitter,
Mm-hmm.
and Facebook, it's Open Relating, one word. Yeah.
Okay. Right.
Mhm.
Fantastic. So yeah, it's been a pleasure speaking with you, Roy. And I'm sure people have, learned a lot from this session. So yeah, here's to more
It's,
collaborations in the future. And yeah, have a great day.
it's been great. Thanks. I'll see you soon, hopefully. Bye bye.
Bye.